Hey, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about a topic that I've been thinking about a lot lately, namely because I've been playing Betrayal Legacy, and I kind of played through Oathsworn. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the topic is branching paths in tabletop games. Basically, the idea is, in narrative games in particular, if you were given a choice, if you were given a choice to go left or right on a path, how important, how big should the differences be between those two paths to make you feel like you made an impactful decision, to make that decision seem worth it? And so today I'm going to talk about branching paths and consequences and whatnot. And I have a few guests that are going to pop up. I'm going to read quotes from them. They're not physically going to be here, but two fairly esteemed designers are going to pop up with their thoughts on this topic of branching paths. I really appreciate them chiming in. So this conversation has been on my mind, and this is number one here. In regards to Betrayal Legacy. And I've been playing through Betrayal Legacy, which is obviously a legacy game where you're playing through a series of scenarios that are, as far as I can tell, somewhat interconnected and somewhat dependent on choices that you've made along the way. But there's also an ongoing story that's happening that doesn't seem to be changing all that much. And I'm finding that I really enjoy it. That I really, really enjoy the method that the designer Rob Daviau has used in Betrayal Legacy to combine those two factors. So what is often happening in the game is that in Betrayal Legacy, you have a traitor and you have the people who aren't traitors, and one of those two entities will win. Either the traitor will win, whatever their win condition was, or the other, everyone else who's not a traitor will win. And my sense is that the impact of who won determines what the next scenario will be. I'm not entirely sure if that's true. I'm guessing that sometimes that is not true, and maybe there's a different impact. Maybe there's some cards added to the deck or not added to the deck. So there's kind of these varying layers or levels of how impactful that, and this isn't a decision, this is more of a result, how impactful that result is. And the reason I've been thinking about it, in particular with this game, is that, as you can tell, I don't really know if the result is all that different. But in many games like this, I wonder if we made the wrong choice or had the wrong result. And sometimes I'll go back and say, okay, well, this result seems more interesting. Let's go back and use that result instead of this other result that we had. But in Betrayal Legacy, that has never even once occurred to me. And that is, I think, because of those layers. One is the layer of just having a few extra cards added to the deck or removed from the deck, just having a few of them. The second is that there are tons of different scenarios in the book, and either way, we're going to be led to a scenario that will be unique and will feel unique, so I'm fine with whatever scenario we're led to, and I also don't want to spoil what the next scenario will be. And the third level is the ongoing story that's happening throughout Betrayal Legacy, which seems to be like the connecting tie that connects all the different scenarios together. And that doesn't seem to be changing all that much. So the decisions I make are still following this well-written story that Rob crafted. So those three levels have been really satisfying to me. I've actually been talking about Betrayal without even talking about the topic that I picked for it, and that is the journey versus the destination, which is kind of the summation of what I'm trying to say here. That the journey along the way of the decisions that we're making and the experience that we're having in each scenario matters to me more than the result of the scenario or the impact of the result. The journey itself is so interesting. And the analogy I used here when I was talking about this on a live cast recently, someone was saying that the destination matters more than anything. And I gave the analogy of if I drove from St. Louis to Kansas City and I took the highway, I took Highway 70 to get to Kansas City, my experience would be very different, even though I end up in Kansas City, than if I took back roads the whole way. That journey, I think, really, really matters. And the experiences and whatever mechanical bonuses I gain along the way based on taking the back road versus the highway really does matter, even though I'm still ending up in Kansas City. So that is my first thought here, journey versus destination. I put the journey above the destination, even if the destination is the same. The second category is, this is a quote, I think, from the live cast. Someone said this: the best games I've played with branching paths that I've played, well, I messed up the quote a little bit. The best games I've played with branching paths make me feel that whatever choice I made ended up being the right choice. No right or wrong choices, just choices. And I thought this was really, really well said. because there are certainly games where you choose one choice or the other, and you're almost trying to decipher which choice is the right choice or which choice is the wrong choice. Almost more like a puzzle than an actual choice. And sometimes in those games, you choose like the clearly wrong choice, and you fail, or something stops or ends, someone dies. And that can be kind of rough, and it's in those situations that you're like, well, maybe we should just go back and say that we chose this instead, because I don't want this character to die. I don't want my foot to get stuck in this trap or whatever it is. So I really like this idea that no matter what choice you make, it is a right choice. It is a reasonable choice to make that might set you down a different path. And I have some examples of that in my game Charterstone. Campaign game, legacy game. In Charterstone, you are given lots of little choices along the way, like which buildings you're going to make, that like mechanical level gameplay decisions. And you're also given choices often at the end of each story, end of each chapter or each scenario in the game. Sometimes it's a choice, and sometimes it's a result. Sometimes the game has said, you need to try to do this thing during this session, and if you do it or don't do it, this is the impact of it. But I really tried to make sure that either choice was relevant. It just became part of your story. It wasn't a binary right or wrong decision. I did that in Charterstone. Also in Lands of Galzyr, really enjoyed my plays of this so far. Lands of Galzyr, you are impacting the world often in your decisions. Like, you might have a choice to help someone build a house. And if you help them build that house, you'll actually put a card on the board from then on that shows that house as a location that you can visit. And so this is a choice where, like, if you choose yes to build the house, then you're going to build the house. You'll have it there from then on. If you choose not to build the house, you're probably doing so because you have something else that you want to do in that moment. Neither choice is right or wrong. One might lead to a more permanent impact in the game, but neither is right or wrong. The other example that came to mind is the Rise of Queensdale. I had a lot of fun playing through the Rise of Queensdale. We unlocked a bunch of random stuff in that game. Like, there's all sorts of little mini games and things that you can add to the game. And never did we feel like we were doing the wrong thing. We just felt like we were choosing one sticker over another or one component over another. And it made our game feel unique because we were doing that. We didn't hit dead ends along the way, basically. So the third category I'm going to talk about is games that let you know when you're about to make a big branching choice. And I think this is a really clever idea to add to a game that has branching paths, because like the example I gave for Betrayal Legacy, there are often layers of decisions, like little, medium, and big. And I think it's really helpful if you let players know, hey, the decision you're about to make is a big decision. It will have a big impact on what will happen moving forward. And Oathsworn is a game that I played the first scenario of, and I realized that I really, really wanted to continue with the story. I wanted to know what happened with the story, so I continued to play it almost as a choose-your-own adventure without the combat. I know a lot of people love the combat. That isn't my cup of tea, even though the combat is very well done in Oathsworn, but I love the choose-your-own adventure part of it. So I kind of just read through the storybook and experienced it in that way. And there were certain times in the storybook where it said, the choice that you are about to make is a big deal. Think about this before you make this choice. And that was really helpful to know. And it was also really helpful to know that along the way, there were a lot of smaller choices that weren't given that level of warning, where I felt like I could make a choice that felt right to me in the moment, even though I knew that it wasn't going to be a huge deal. And I actually read in the storybook, I read some of the differences between the two, and oftentimes it was just a slightly different benefit that I might be able to use later, a token that I might gain. And that was enough for me for those little choices. But it was also great that they had some of those big warnings for those big choices along the way. I haven't played much of Journeys in Middle-earth, the Lord of the Rings game, but I've heard that there are similar warnings in that game. And in the Adventures of Robin Hood, I did play through this game. It was around a 7-game campaign. And in the storybook itself, it shows you each chapter, and it actually physically shows you on a chart. I don't have the game anymore right now. I think someone's borrowing it. But it shows you a branching path in the story. So it says, like, after chapter 5, you were either going to choose chapter 6 or you're going to choose chapter 7. I probably don't have those numbers correct. But it is a physical representation of a split path. So you get to know in there that you're making a big decision at the end of chapter 4 or chapter 5, whatever it is. I think that's a great idea to add in a game with branching paths. The fourth category is the idea of having converging paths with different obstacles or benefits along the way. This is kind of similar to the Kansas City example that I mentioned earlier, where, and this stuff I did in Charterstone too, there are like tech tree paths in Charterstone, but the core story itself looks like a DNA strand where I crafted a story for Charterstone similar to what Rob Daviau did in Betrayal Legacy. There's a tight, fairly linear story, but along the way is kind of a helix of decision points. So you make a decision point, or you make a decision, you split temporarily, different things happen along the way. You have different obstacles, different benefits along those divergent paths, but you come back to a fairly similar point, having gained that experience, having gained that story, having gained those different benefits along the way, or different obstacles that you ran into along the way. I think that is a method that I really, really like in Branching Paths. And I think sometimes, and you might differ from my opinion on this, but I think sometimes that's confused with decisions that don't matter because you end up at the same place. But again, I think journey before destination, there are things that you can do along those paths that add significantly to the story that you tell, the mechanisms that you experience or the benefits that you gain along the way, and the obstacles that you gain that you encounter along the way. I think those still matter. Those still have a big impact, even if you end up at the same place along that helix. Some examples of this are in Fenris. So in the Rise of Fenris, the Scythe expansion, this is a campaign expansion, 8 games. It does have this helix method where there are several big paths along the way where you're going to choose one of 2 different paths. And those paths still end up converging along the way to the same story point. I think after scenario 2, maybe there's a split. You choose 1 or 2, and then but you still end up at scenario 3. There isn't a totally different path there. And part of this is a design choice, because if every path splits into a completely different story point, a completely different scenario, that makes designing the game really, really difficult, and especially balancing the game, it makes that really, really difficult, because then you end up with a near infinite number of paths that you could choose. Whereas if you keep this double helix a little bit tighter, you can design around specific scenarios and still have little splits along the way, whether they're split scenarios or split obstacles, benefits, and so on. Shadow of Salvation, I thought, also does this really well. In Shadow of Salvation, this is only a 3 or 4 game campaign for Shards of Infinity, and at the end of each scenario, you end up fighting one boss or the other boss for the next scenario. So you are getting a completely different experience. You're getting a completely different boss in every scenario, and you don't get to return to the boss that you didn't fight. You're either fighting boss A, boss B, and then you're fighting either boss C or boss D, and so on until you're done with the campaign. I really like this for a campaign game because even though we were ending up at the same place after each one, we had a completely different experience along the way, and it meant that we could play through the campaign twice in a reasonable amount of time because it was a shorter campaign, and we chose, instead of choosing A, we chose B, instead of choosing C, we chose D the next time that we played. So I really like the way those games do it. Oathsworn, I think, has the same style of converging paths along with different obstacles and benefits along the way. So here we're going to get to one of the guests that I have today, the category that Sleeping Gods does. So Sleeping Gods is a very open world game. So this doesn't have a tight helix story. It lets you wander around the world and go wherever you want and experience your own story and complete your own goals along the way. And leave it up on the table while I talk about it. And one of the really cool things about Sleeping Gods is oftentimes you can, if you have a goal or you see an island that looks interesting to you, you can drift over to that island. You can sail over to that island. You can deal with stuff on that island. Even though along the way you might be giving up the decision to go to a different island, because in Sleeping Gods, after you visit Island A, you can always go back to Island B. And rarely will Island A change Island B because they're completely different islands. There are different things happening on those islands. Sometimes there can be things that happen where you wait too long to rescue someone, and that decision, that option can go away. But I really like how Sleeping Gods lets you choose one path, but then later choose a path that you didn't do before. This is a different type of branching path method, really, because you still have those options to choose throughout the game, but one doesn't negate the other, basically. I reached out to designer Ryan Lockett to see what Ryan thought about branching paths, and I'm going to read a long quote from Ryan. Ryan was very kind to reply, so the following is from Ryan. Quote, "In branching path games, the captivating promise is that your choice will lead you to a different consequence, mechanically and narratively, is a huge part of the appeal. It gives the branching paths meaning, even if the players don't see the outcome of the unchosen path. To give the choices weight, the game designer needs to create content that the player will never see. That's a big choice for a designer to make. Most savvy players will realize that if too many of the branches lead to the same thing, that can greatly deflate the sense of choice. So this is a little different than the helix method that I've described here. In Sleeping Gods, Distant Skies, we made choices weightier by attaching permanent consequences to them. For example, side characters can die, quests can have sad or unexpected endings, or you might find unique equipment that you can't get any other way. In the original Sleeping Gods, creating multiple endings was a lot of work, but it added weight to every choice you make in the game, knowing that your ending might be wildly different than what another player experiences. Thank you, Ryan, so much for sharing that. I really appreciate your insights about this, especially after how much I enjoyed Sleeping Gods, and I'm looking forward to Sleeping Gods Distant Skies. The next game that I have in this category is another, they're getting like heavier as I pull them out, is Clank Legacy. So in Clank Legacy, the category I want to talk about here for Clank Legacy is that there's a combination of a few big choices and a lot of little choices. I've talked about this a little bit so far in the video, but I wanted to highlight it specifically here because in Clank Legacy, you're making a lot of little decisions about, like the board starts only half created, maybe a third created, and as you walk down a certain path, you will add a sticker to the board, and oftentimes there's a choice for that sticker, or you're choosing like to go down one path over another. You're literally choosing to walk down one path over another, and the order in which you add those stickers to the board can have an impact on your game. Those are little choices. They feel good, especially since there's the element of permanence. You're putting a sticker permanently on the board, but it doesn't permanently impact your story in most cases. But there are also some big decisions that you make in Clank Legacy. I won't spoil any of them here, but they are very big decisions that you have to make. And I think the combination of the two can work really well. A lot of little choices, maybe some medium choices, and a few big choices that you give players warnings about. Role Player Adventures is the other even bigger game here. Role Player Adventures here. So this is a game, one of my favorite games of a few years ago. I look forward to getting the expansion and playing through a new campaign. So this game I thought did a particularly good job at providing a long-term investment in its choices with both a gameplay and a story impact. So a lot of these games have choices that impact you right away, like you choose path A or path B. Right away you are walking down path A or path B. In Role Player Adventures, many of the choices you make, like the characters you ally with, the factions you ally with or that you betray, they will come back in the final scenario in a big way, like a big climatic movie style way. And that I thought was awesome, absolutely awesome. You can watch my video about this game. I have a long video about this topic because it was really neat to see those decisions that we made along the way come back to have an impact at the end of the game. So I kind of like this category of decisions you make may not have an immediate impact, but they kind of reserve something that will have an impact later on in the story. It shows you that the game took the care and time to remember those decisions that you made. The eighth category, I have 11 categories. I thought I had 10, but I actually have 11 here. The eighth category is that you don't have any results that simply undo previous choices. This, I think, is a great rule to have for branching path games. No results that simply completely undo previous choices. Like, say you choose to unlock a door versus break down a door. And when you break down the door, you crush a very important insect to that world. If you do that, for that choice to have meaning, that you broke down that door and that you crushed that insect, you can't later, like 3 passages later, say, oh, the insect is fine. Either way, the insect was going to be fine. Hopefully the insect is fine, but I think this is an important rule of thumb to have, that your choices, when you do give players choices, that they have consequences and you don't undo those choices based on a story that you wanted to tell versus letting the players tell their story. An example of this is an Aeon's End Legacy. It's been a little bit of a while since I played Aeon's End Legacy, but I really like that the story always was moving forward. We weren't undoing things choices that we made along the way. I thought that was a great addition to the game. So here's a big game, and I have a quote from a designer who's actually not linked to this game, but King's Dilemma, The King's Dilemma, one of my favorite legacy campaign games I've ever played. This is a game where you make massive choices throughout the game. Not only are you making choices, but you are voting on those choices with the other players. And those choices have a huge impact on the components that you see and that you do not see throughout the game. In the King's Dilemma, there are, like, by the end of our campaign, we had opened maybe half of the envelopes, and there were another I don't know, 40 envelopes that we never even opened. And it's very cool to do this. I think that's an amazing achievement that the designers made that decision, that the publisher put that investment in components that players will never see. But at the same time, that's a lot of added cost to the game for something that players will never, ever see. And that's the case for many of these games, these campaign games. If you design a campaign game with 20 scenarios, most people will never see that 20th scenario. They'll see maybe a few games of the campaign. But in King's Dilemma, it's a core part of the game to open these envelopes and put those cards into the deck that you're playing through. And so I thought it was really interesting, a really interesting almost budgetary and production choice to not let players experience that. But at the same time, they were huge branching paths. My story for King's Dilemma is very, very different than your story. Not only in terms of what you unlocked, but also in terms of when you unlocked what you unlocked. The guest designer I reached out to, because I think this designer has done branching paths really well in a number of games, is the aforementioned Rob Daviau. He is not involved in the King's Dilemma, but he had something. His quote is related to this topic. So Rob says, "I try not to do branching paths too much in legacy games, since you only get one time through it, as is with the case with the King's Dilemma as well. This would mean that the players would buy a lot of material that they wouldn't ever get to." And I actually took this to heart. I've heard Rob talk about this, and I took that to heart in Charterstone. That's why I had the double helix method in Charterstone, where you get to experience all the major story beats and the major components included in the game. There aren't any boxes in Charterstone that you're not going to open if you finish the 12-game campaign. But Rob says with a campaign game, so a non-legacy campaign game, you can start over and explore different options, see the things you missed. But yes, in a campaign game, I would make sure that the players feel like the protagonists. Their actions and choices should matter. People engage with the material more when they have some agency and control with the material. So Rob is kind of delineating here between legacy games that you only play once and campaign games, particularly shorter campaign games that you might play through more than once. Number 10 here is, it's kind of just a question. Do you tell players the consequences or just hint at them? And the example I have here is the game Legacy of Dragonholt. And Legacy of Dragonholt, I have a tragic memory from Legacy of Dragonholt, in almost a good way, of the game kind of telling me that something bad was going to happen if I didn't use my time efficiently. And I kept doing these little side quests along the way instead of focusing on the thing that the game wanted me to do. And time ran out, and something really bad happened in the game. And it has sat with me after all these years because I made that decision. I chose not to rush forward and deal with the thing that was so important. The game was outright telling me something really bad is going to happen if you don't hurry. And so I like, for the most part, when games are very clear about the consequences, or hint at least strongly that there is a big consequence that's going to happen. It's kind of like the warnings that I mentioned earlier, warning players about a big path, a big split that's going to happen. Similarly, warning players that the decision, that there's a momentous impact if they don't do something or if they do something. I think that can be really helpful. At the same time, I don't want to tell players exactly what's going to happen. I prefer to leave those consequences to the players' imaginations. Hint at them, but don't say, like, if you fight this knight, this thing will happen, opposed to you talking to the knight, because that's for players to talk about and discuss and figure out on their own. If I talk to someone versus fighting them, obviously something different will happen. Let me experience that for myself. The last category I have here is the impact of linearity in terms of how much you can discuss your story with others who have played the same game. And so this is kind of the meta approach to tabletop gaming and campaign games, that with some of these games that I mentioned today, the paths are so different that we take and that you may have taken, that it's very hard to discuss with you what happened. Like, I can share my story of the King's Dilemma with you, but it may not make all that much sense to you because your story might be so different. And that's pretty cool. In itself, that is cool that we have very different stories. At the same time, if you play Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and you've ever tried to talk to someone about it, you can actually do that because some of the biggest story beats happen at the same time to different people. So we can share that story together. It's like going to watch the same movie together. I can discuss Star Wars with you because your experience of watching Star Wars, even though it might be slightly different, we watch the same story along the way. And so I think I do appreciate and I like the meta approach of having this double helix method of a singular linear story with different paths and obstacles along the way that you get to choose, but you get to still make sure that every player hits those major story beats along the way so that they can actually discuss it with other players. They can discuss it with completely different other groups and share that experience with other people. Whereas some of these other games, it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult for me to discuss Sleeping Gods with someone else, or the King's Dilemma with someone else, because their experience will be vastly different than my own, which can still, again, make for an interesting discussion. It's just a little harder to discuss, I think. All right, those are my thoughts on designing games with branching paths and the different decisions you can make as a designer. I'd love to hear your preferences, especially among the games that I've referenced here. Which version of branching paths do you really enjoy in these games? What are some games that I haven't played, that you've played, that I haven't mentioned here, that have branching paths, and what did you like or dislike about them? Whether they were small decisions, big decisions, if they were results versus choices. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This is a topic that's on my mind a lot, and I am very, very curious to hear what you think about it. Thanks.